The time for this session. It's really one of those sessions that in my mind anchors so much of what Climate Week actually means. We just had that debate. Some of you may have missed the debate, but I think in many ways this session will ground what we just heard. My name is Wanjira Mathai and I'm the Managing Director for Africa at the World Resources Institute. And because of that, this conversation will in many ways be anchored on the African experience. But you know and we know that as we heard from Ajaita and others, the Global South experience is not so different. So you can almost extrapolate. But we stand at the threshold of Africa's transformation. It's no exaggeration to say that. But today we confront a very profound truth. Meeting our SDGs, addressing climate action, and green job creation are not that dissimilar. They're actually inseparable, they're intertwined. But we hear a lot of voices. It didn't necessarily come up in this session, but we hear voices in the global discourse that's why I mentioned the point about a sense of sacrifice and loss. They argue, a lot of people do, that green job creation, particularly in the raw material rich and mineral rich South, comes at the expense of jobs in the North. And that creates a polarity that's unhelpful, because we know that evidence tells us time and time again that the green transition actually often creates even more jobs than it displaces. And the just transition in many ways, and the reality is, should not be a zero-sum game. It's a symphony, I like to think, of opportunities where each note enhances the whole. But here's the thing. We live in an increasingly carbon-intensive world. And this we have to constantly keep in the forefront. It's the reality. We are architecting our own apocalypse if we do not address. So the urgency of action, not so much ambition, action itself, the idea of shared prosperity and climate justice has got to be our North Star. Put another way, and a message that I've been sharing across Climate Week this week, the world can simply not afford to ignore the climate solution opportunities that Africa presents today. You're looking at a continent with three amazing opportunities that we don't always hear about. The youngest and fastest growing workforce in the world. In 2050, 1 in every 5 people in the workforce will be African. Some of the best solar potential in the world, 60% of the best solar potential in the world sits on the African continent, but only 3% of solar investment flows where the sun shines. The abundance of critical minerals for the renewable energy sector, raw materials, and the story goes on. But Africa is also the continent of some of the greatest restoration opportunities. Even in this room I've met already so many people who are involved in green job creation around trees, bamboo, and what that means for a decarbonized future, a more sustainable future, and inspiring a restoration generation. On the African continent sits the healthiest land in the planet. It's in our enlightened self-interest to protect this incredible land of the planet that stores 6 times the annual emissions of global economic activities. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, of this we can be sure. The world will simply not accomplish the Sustainable Development Goals, bless Antonio Guterres. We will not address our climate goals if we do not invest in these opportunities on the African continent and build inclusive green economies. And that's why we're excited about exploring public-private philanthropic partnerships that unlock resilient economies on the African continent. That is the greatest investment story anywhere. We see today countries like Togo, Benin, Ghana unlocking value chains in cotton, Guinea, Sierra Leone, lithium, bauxite, iron ore. Change is inevitable, it's coming. and it will define our collective future. And for us to have a chance at a livable future, the biggest emitters amongst us must commit to deep decarbonization, especially in transport and manufacturing. And these opportunities must be part of that equation. This is no longer debatable. Not even Sophie will make that a debate next. So in this global context, we are on the cusp of a transformative moment that we can all redefine. And Africa is not just a participant in that, and that's why I talked about reclaiming this narrative. We're showcasing a new paradigm for economic transformation and in a climate-friendly and people-centered world. But as we move forward, we must, all of us, embody this collective commitment and navigate this era of polycrisis. And there's an attention we must turn that is often ignored when we talk about the climate crisis. And this is the extraordinary force of positive change, and that's African youth. Take a look.
In recent months, young people in Kenya, Bangladesh, and beyond have driven significant political shifts, reminding citizens of the power held in engaging in our civic duty. The inspiring and courageous actions have led to historic changes. In Bangladesh, we saw the resignation of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and an interim government appointed led by Nobel Peace Prize winner Professor Mohammed Idris. Whilst in Kenya, we saw the withdrawal of a contentious finance bill and the dismissal of an entire cabinet, showcasing the hallmark of an engaged, young, and civic-minded population. This is not just a moment. This is a movement. One that is led by young people who are optimistic and entrepreneurial, eager to invest in their home. In Kenya we say, Kenya ni home. Kenya is home. We are the young leaders and citizens who embody determination, courage, and imagination. Our future is now. Let us harness this moment and advocate for a seismic shift in how we invest. One that empowers all levels of society and our communities. Together, we can create pathways that secure sustainable economic growth for all. The time for action is now.
Yes, you've heard from Joy, and she deserves an applause like the others who were part of the movement in Kenya, part of the Generation Z, the new generation that is giving us inspiration, that is giving us hope. My name is Marovic. I'm the head of the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict in Washington, D.C., a think tank that researches social movements and the involvement of ordinary citizens in shaping their policy. But before I moved to D.C., I spent 8 years in Kenya. I lived in Africa. That's why I wear my Kenyan necktie for the occasion. And I'm really inspired by what I see, the footage that is coming from Kenya and from Bangladesh. It shows this force that the youth represents today. Let me just try to paint like a big picture. In the moment where we're facing the climate crisis and where we're facing enormous challenges and the need for significant mobilization of all sectors of society in all countries in the world. What do we need to do? We need to do many things. We need to do total retooling of our economy, transition to green energy, which we know is capital intensive. But we will also have to create some very significant organizational and social changes in order to address everything from extreme weather events to other ways that the climate crisis is going to manifest itself. In the way that for energy transition, transition, decarbonization, other things, we need capital. For meeting these challenges that the climate represents, we need resilient communities that will be able to address that, and for that we need social capital. And that social capital, as we see, is built by social movements. Social capital is built by the engagement of these young people like Joy you heard from. So I am inspired by the things that I hear from Kenya, but I haven't been there. So I would like to ask Wanjiru, what we see, is this really happening? Is this something that we can believe in? Is this just a fairy tale? Can you share with us the context and what is going on and what the engagement of this Gen Z represents in the current moment of the climate crisis?
Thanks so much, Ivan. It's interesting that you use the word fairy tale, because this session was sort of framed as a conversation about the ultimate investment story. And in preparing for what I was hoping would be a fascinating conversation, and I'm really looking forward to getting into it with Shiro here, who represents a particular protagonist in this tale, it occurred to me that the ultimate investment story, if it was looking for a genre, the genre that we really would need to work with is the genre of the fairy tales, right? The story of entrepreneurs and investors is in fact a tale as old as time. And it's really a question of understanding, the journey of the entrepreneur who has a dream, the journey of the investor who is seeking to commit to that dream, and the context in which they're operating. Now the question becomes, if in fact this is about a fairy tale, what plot line perhaps best embodies this present moment? And I think the plot line that best embodies this present moment is the story of Little Red Riding Hood. And I'm wearing a symbolic representation of Hood. Shiro actually manufactured this textile, so she perhaps is the grandmother in this tale. But I say that acknowledging also that she's ageless and timeless, and therefore that is literally just a figure of speech. But what's the story of Little Red Riding Hood? Depending on how you look at it, it's a cautionary tale or it's a visionary tale. We have somebody who is desiring to do good, who's going on a journey, carrying resources, who comes across actors in her journey that she co-opts into her narrative, perhaps naive, perhaps optimistic. And in one version of the story, which is the cautionary tale, she meets an awkward end with nothing much to show for it. And quite often for entrepreneurs, that is the journey that you're on. You're hoping to do some good in the world, you're hoping to generate goodwill and bring people alongside, but you're also quite aware eventually that bringing people alongside sometimes is not enough for you to have a sustainable and lasting impact in the way you had imagined. On the flip, there's also the possibility of the visionary tale. And so we have this person committing to do good, going on a journey, meeting people along the way, going with them only so far, having to pivot, having to reframe, having to redirect, having in some cases to unalive wolves, and end up in a scenario where she builds a community of interest. You have the woodsman who saves the day, you have the grandmother whose wisdom enables them to outwit the wolf in the end, and somehow we get to a place where there's a happier ending. And when we think about the fairy tale that investment represents, we also recognize some of the factors that Wanjira was talking about very often sound like fairy tales. It sounds like this very exotic, happy ending, vision casting that's being sort of put out there about Africa and its potential. But the point is, how you see what was on the screen is framed behind the perceived Africa as a place, right? If you perceive Africa as a place on which the future success of the world, from a climate, sustainability, and just transition perspective rests, what you see is something that's a call to action and an opportunity. If you see Africa as a place where dreams go to die, then this becomes funereal and somewhat sad. And we're here to challenge that narrative. So Wanjiru is sitting next to me, Shiro Waweru, She has been characterized in many spaces as a creative serial entrepreneur. And she is awe-inspiring because of the journey that she's been on, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about that. But she's also awe-inspiring because she inspires hope against tremendous odds. So if you could give Shiro a big hand. We could get started. And so Shiro, just a softball question as we frame this situation and this conversation about narrative. Tell us about your journey.
How much time do we have? Let's start with I got lost coming here. The real African entrepreneur determined to sell what she makes, lugging luggage through the subways in New York. At some point I wanted to just sit and start selling on the road. I knew Wanjira would kill me. What an absolute pleasure to be here and truly to be given the opportunity to speak. Many times, like sessions we had in the morning, they talk about entrepreneurs, they talk to entrepreneurs, and we just sit and smile. We're like, but why isn't the entrepreneur telling you where the shoe pinches? Coming up with policies and we're not in the room. So I'll call myself a shapeshifter, not by choice. It's actually quite painful to shapeshift, but because of need. So wanted to be an interior architect, so I studied that at the Glasgow School of Art, good school. Then went home to Kenya and realized design is not enough. We need to create multiplier of jobs. So we founded a business called Fun Kids to design dignified furniture for children. Wanjira has shared the numbers, we all know the numbers in Africa. It's a growing population, meaning any children who need to go to school. So it's not so much about the technology they need to use in class. They need to sit on a chair, on a desk. It may seem basic, maybe, but it's the need. So my entrepreneurial journey is not out of passion. You cannot develop anything with passion. It's because of a need we have on the continent. I am accused of being a serial entrepreneur. I hate that. It's not serial entrepreneurship in Africa. We have so many challenges, so we rise up to it. We do not have attention deficit or whatever. We know when we go to the school and they don't have desks, oh, we need to make desks. They don't have shoes. Let's make the shoes, and I'll speak to that a bit. So it's not that we're all over the place. It's because we do not have the luxury of time as a continent before everybody finishes their meetings and decides to come to Africa, which is getting stuff done. And that's who I am.
And it's opposite that when Little Red Riding Hood was on the way to visit her grandmother, she stopped to pick flowers and kept going and kept going and kept going. Did not stop, got there in the end though. And that's an important piece of the puzzle. Now, we're talking about Kenyanisms. There's a saying in Kenya, and it goes something like this. Kwa ground, vitu ni different. Which literally translates as, on the ground, it's different. Whatever it is they're talking about here, once you get to the ground, things are different, you need to adapt. And it seems, in the context of narratives, that there is an actual translation issue with regard to risk and how investors think about Africa and risk, and with regard to opportunity and how entrepreneurs see the opportunity. Have you suffered from that loss of sort of translation, and is there something that you need to translate as the entrepreneur who has the microphone right now?
Again, how much time do we have? It's very interesting when you look at websites and they ask you to scroll to the language, whether it's British English, American English, Spanish. Entrepreneurship is the same. The language we speak may not be by the creator of the website, meaning the investors. So the shoe pitches us differently. Actually, we don't even maybe have the shoe. So many times when we speak of what we believe, and I mean believe, can change the continent short, medium, and long term, generationally, people look at us like, that's not smart enough. And I'm like, it really is, if you look at the size of the continent and the need, right? So the yardsticks used to measure what an African entrepreneur, let me add an African woman entrepreneur, that's a whole other conversation. But we don't go by that. We don't say we're women, there's no pink or blue bank account. We're entrepreneurs. The yardsticks, in my opinion, are really unfair. They're really, really, I would use other words, but they're really unfair. And it's not right.
In what way? What's unfair, and then what does fairness actually look like?
Fairness means just, means take the risk. We've already shown we're there. We're in deep. Not, money is important, we will make money, but human first. You cannot be possibly sitting here or wherever you are in the comfort of your home, and these people who are dying of hunger through problems they haven't created themselves. No, it's not okay. That's what unfair is. It doesn't matter who you are. It's not okay that we've packed the streets like we have here, talking in rooms. And the people we're talking about have never been to school. That's just naughty. And I'm being very polite.
So what's interesting to me about what you've said in the context of fairness and about impact is the reality that what we're solving for is the question of human dignity. And that came through quite a bit in the debate that we just had. What we're solving for is also a vision of how the world works that respects local insight, local expertise, local outcomes and impact. You mentioned that, being a woman and being in business in Africa sometimes feels like a crime. You actually mentioned that in a conversation we had before we started this session. And the reason for that is because the dilemma that Africa faces is that's where the answers are, that's where the resources are, that's where people, raw materials, renewable energy, that's where the funding needs to go. And the gap has been quantified, $2.5 trillion, it's eye-watering, between 2030 and 2050 to meet nationally determined contributions, to have a shot at sustainable transition. 14% of that capital right now is coming from the private sector. And one would think that with that kind of opportunity and that kind of room to participate, that number should be much, much higher. But yet it's really quite small. Of that 14%, only 1% is going into industries. Most of it is going into renewable energy, which is good enough, it's a good start, but that energy needs to be used for production. And the production isn't going to happen by itself. There's such a disconnect in those numbers that one can be forgiven for thinking, poor little Red Riding Hood, as she was on her journey, did not recognize that she was getting into a horror story, right? But yet, the cautionary tale and the visionary tale, what do you think the ecosystem needs to do to bridge some of those gaps? If you had to pick 3 things.
I would say we need to listen, but listen intentionally, not speak. Listen to, what I mean listen is, what is the need? If you look at the images behind us, there's me learning carpentry in a very rudimentary school in Kenya. This is after a degree in interior architecture, but I didn't know how to make anything, so I went to a school. It's what we had then. Then the next picture is of me buying what is considered a robot, my first numerical cutting machine. This is in Kenya. As a woman in manufacturing, we have technology. And then the next picture is we actually opened our first outlet together with another brand in Atlanta, Georgia in the US, May this year. If you look at the bottom images, these are AI images where we use technology, everything. What we need to do is first listen to Africa. She is phenomenal. She has internet speeds you can't even begin to imagine. compared to other places. So we can leapfrog so much of what's been done before. Right now, I am now also manufacturing in the US using technology as of a month ago. All we do is design on computers, send our files to a company in the US, they put the stuff on AI, and we're making stuff. We get it. Kenya can do this between Kenya, Ghana, Kenya, or name it. We understand tech. We may not want to go to the moon at the moment, because we're kind of busy to do other things, but the tech we need can scale exponentially. I need us to listen, and I need us to listen with our hearts. That's number one, and number two, because doing it just because it's a business, and I've been to all the business schools I can possibly go to, and I'm like, there's something missing. And it comes to number three. The number three that's missing is you need to be on the ground. You need to be like the children who walk to school barefoot and they can't. When we talk about climate change being real, the ground is so hot their feet burn. Shame on us for not seeing that. So we are even going out and literally begging, and we have no shame in that, and saying, give us your tires. If you see the bottom of my shoe, I'm a bit dramatic obviously. If you see the bottom of my shoe, it's made of waste tires, old tires, we are all guilty. And we say, just give them to us, we create jobs. Women are able to make shoes, not because it's fashionable, of course they have to be cute too, but for every pair you buy from us, we're giving them to children in schools as well. It's not okay to be giving children technology in classrooms that they can't even get to, and if they get to, they have no desk or chair to sit on, nor does the teacher. So I think we need to listen to Africa, what she needs, what she's telling us, and then truly business needs to be with the heart. And I feel that's been missing for a long, long time.
So, you know, it's so interesting because you're translating so much of what came through the debate into a sort of real hearts and minds kind of connection here, where it stops being something that's driven by statistics, facts, and figures, and it starts being driven by something that is tangible, actionable, impactful. And that's actually really meaningful. Wanjira, I'd be interested to hear from you the whole idea of creating synergies on the continent, because one of the quite interesting elements of the challenge about the cautionary versus the visionary fairy tale is that there's a sense that people are too far removed from the problems to offer tangible solutions. And at the same time, there's a sense that there's lots of actors trying to do lots of things. So how do you get everyone together to recognize you don't necessarily all have to be pulling in the same on the same strand to create an outcome, right? There's a space for philanthropy, there's a space for venture capital, there's a space for corporate capital, there's a space for transactional advisors, there's a space for everyone at the table if they would only see it. Help us understand what WRI is doing in that regard.
You know, one of the things that we try to do in listening, and Shiro is one of the people we listen to all the time, is to understand if we know what needs to be done, and there's some brilliant entrepreneurs even in this room, why isn't it happening? What's holding us back? So I spend a lot of time in the what's holding us back space, and I get a lot of energy from the what's holding us back space, because it is, you know, the tools we have, the wisdom that's needed is there. But we've started talking a lot about mindset. And we've started talking about the fact that actually it's not so much that we don't have the tools, we don't have, it's actually the fact that we don't even believe it to be true. And that's toxic, it's tragic, because we don't actually have time. And we have this expression that I know was an American speechwriter's expression of the tyranny of low expectations. When you expect so little from the most disadvantaged, then you settle for very little. You don't have to understand Africa, actually.
because I can from here sort of see it all. It's what it is. So we are actually up against a significant mindset shift that is holding us back on sustainable development, it's holding us back on climate, but it's a real opportunity. And so that for us at WRI is actually quite important. How do we bridge the tyranny of low expectation and begin to understand? In fact, we are banishing the use of the word potential, because we're saying it's not a potential, it's actually a promise. It's there. We need to unlock it. I don't know how many entrepreneurs I've talked to who tell me all the time, all we need is this piece of the puzzle. We're there. We're all, and they have everything, Glasgow, MIT, they have it all. They understand exactly what they're doing. But there's something missing that we have to bridge, that we have to unlock. And part of that is where the partnership comes in.
It's great, it's great. Now, one of the things we were hoping to achieve in the context of this gathering was actually to start a conversation. And there are a couple of people in the room that have had either experiences or perspectives that are relevant to a bit of what has been said here, in fact, a lot of what has been said here. And you know, we have a Rumpelstiltskin in our midst. Philip Kwaku, who's sitting in the back, I warned him that I was going to call on him. And his particular fairy tale is one of being locked up in a room, turning straw into gold, and trying to make sense of the idea that, you know, there are a series of expectations that sometimes feel unrealizable, but really people are perhaps unaware of where the magic is happening. So Philip, tell us a little bit about your story in the Ghanaian textile context.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. And I like all the sort of the metaphors and the sort of relations back to Rumpelstiltskin. I've forgotten a lot of those stories from childhood. So anyway, my name is Philip, and I'm director for one of the textile mills in Ghana, in West Africa, which produces these colorful African prints that you see, which are ubiquitous all over West Africa when you come there. And we have an operation in Ghana, and we produce and we sell most of the West African markets. We export into Nigeria, into Togo, a bit into the US. If you know Joann's fabrics here in the US, we've been supplying Joann's and also into Europe. And I wanted to just go back to a point that one of the speakers made earlier, that, you know, when I got involved in this about 6-7 years ago, frankly, it really was not out of passion or some sort of like emotional drive. It was just out of a very pragmatic, burning need. And that need was one about job creation and unemployment. I have been working in Nigeria for many years as advisor to the minister. And in Nigeria, every year we graduate about 2 million people from our tertiary institutions. 2 million of them graduate and come into the labor market every year. About a quarter of them would get sort of jobs, you know, in the formal and informal sector. Another quarter may just end up doing odd jobs and hustling and, you know, trying to sort themselves out. And that still leaves about half of the people, 1 million people every single year, coming into the labor market unemployed. Now, that is a very scary prospect once you think about it. And for me, that job creation need was a very big and pressing need. If you think of all the insecurity, if you think of, like, you know, climate hardship and climate sort of effects taking place in northern Nigeria, Lake Chad sort of like shrinking, arable land not being available, even migration across the Mediterranean now getting into Europe. Of course, people would migrate. Of course, people would try and leave to seek a better economic prospect for themselves. Unless and until we can create good economic opportunities in a climate positive way locally for people, these problems will still persist. So that really was a pragmatic drive that led us to this. Now, the second observation also was that West Africa in particular also had a lot of natural resources which could be harnessed to actually generate this economic prosperity locally. So if you thought about raw materials in agriculture, whether it's cotton, whether it's cocoa, whatever, there's just abundant resources over there. Renewable energy resources, again, fantastic, you know. Very good solar radiation, very good hydropower resources. Why can't we put all of this together and generate sort of these industrial manufacturing jobs.
We're recording, so we need you to.
And generate these industrial manufacturing jobs that really can create prosperity locally for people. That is how I got involved in the textiles and garment space. Our operation in Ghana, in West Africa, is situated near the Akosombo Dam, which is one of the largest hydropower dams in West Africa. So we are using renewable green energy. But we did not stop there. We went further and we decarbonized almost all our production. So all our boilers now don't run on diesel or fossil fuels anymore. They run now on agro waste. You know, Ghana has a lot of palm kernel shells, cocoa husks, coconut husks. So this type of stuff powers our boilers now. So in the language of sort of the engineering industry, we've decarbonized the production and we've made a lot of sort of our production climate positive, net zero, and sort of checks all the right boxes now. I think, so the first observation about jobs being needed, the second about, you know, how can you harness the resources to do something? And I think the third thing was the demand, right? So this is again not just a wishful thinking or an emotive thing, but there is growing demand now for this good, sustainably produced garments or apparel by the international markets. So a lot of big fashion brands have made big promises, you know, whether to their customers, whether to young millennial buyers, whether to the capital markets, that they are going to be more sustainable, more ESG friendly. It is a big opportunity. Just read sort of the annual reports from, I don't know, Ralph Lauren or PVH or anything. There are all these big commitments on sustainability by 2030. So, bingo, there is an opportunity there. I mean, it's easily said, not so easily done. But when I'm in New York, I always like to walk down Fifth Avenue and check out some of those shops. So one of my favorites is a Japanese brand called Muji. So go check out the Muji shop. You'll be surprised how much of the cotton t-shirts you see tells you organic cotton sourced from Africa. And I'm like, dude, man, this is my cotton. I need to make money out of this that these guys are selling over here, you know. I need to make some money out of this. And I also need to, West Africa has about 10% of the world's cotton exports, between 8 to 10%. So we need to think really how we can harness this value chain and capture some of this value. So increasingly you can see the convergence of, you know, the supply opportunity and also the demand pool which is driving this. And if all of that can come together and help sort of generate the jobs, then this could be a good thing. We're not asking for aid, we're not asking for charity, we are asking for, like, you know, a very pragmatic win-win-win opportunity that would be in the interest of everybody. Again, it's easily said, but I'm always very encouraged to see that mindsets are shifting, the market is also shifting. And you see, markets move slowly, but once they move, they really do move, and the equilibrium would happen, and people would get there. What can we do, and what more would be needed from, you know, whether from private capital, public sources, philanthropic capital? And in the previous life, I worked with McKinsey, the consulting firm, and McKinsey also did quite a lot of work about green manufacturing in Africa. And it's one of the main recommendations that came out of this work also had been about training and skills development. So again, no single individual or entrepreneur commits money into, say, something which has positive externalities, a public good like training skilled labor, for example, or putting in place infrastructure for waste collection, textile recycling, all this type of stuff. These are things that have, like, they are public goods. Unfortunately, most African governments may not have the fiscal space or the fiscal room to do that now. So again, this is one of the things I think philanthropic capital can step in, can help in training, can help in helping to build up the infrastructure, building out, you know, one of my favorite things about, you see all this thing about net zero industrial parks. I mean, when you see the net zero industrial parks people are talking about, my brother, they are producing green hydrogen, green ammonia, like these are like fantastic, exciting stuff. This is not what we're asking for in Africa. I'm just asking for like a net zero industrial park to produce garments, to produce, like, you know, sustainable apparel, to produce things that would generate massive jobs and generate massive jobs very quickly to really sort of bring economic prosperity to people. And to the extent that philanthropic capital, public capital, private capital, concessional capital can be harnessed to get this together, I think that would be very fantastic. We're not going to give up, we're not going to stop talking, we are going to keep fighting, and pushing this agenda until the market moves to this. So let's keep on the fight on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I see Colin is in the front row.
Boy.
Surprise, surprise. And I think what Philip picked up on is so interesting because he's talking about industrialization. And that's, you know...
Sorry. These chairs are not conducive.
And you know, he said, you know, he's driven by need, not necessarily by passion, but I think your drive, in a way, draws from both levers in terms of the need that's visible and the passion for what could be possible. So, I need to pick your fairy tale, but in the meantime, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the African Green Industrialization Initiative and the fact that this, again, this isn't just, you know, this isn't a pipe dream, right? This isn't a hopeful and happy ending. These are things that are happening now, and the question for, I think, everyone who's still in this space, who's still listening to this conversation is, why aren't you in it? And that's a real question.
Thank you. I don't know what the fairy tale is either, but maybe I'll get there. And you said earlier, sort of moving from numbers to real stories. I'm going to take us back to numbers for a second, to just put things in perspective a little bit. And my favorite example, and Wanjira has heard it 1,000 times, is bauxite. Africa mines a quarter of the world's bauxite, the ingredient to aluminum. It exports 98% of that as bauxite, a rock. Goes on a ship, goes somewhere, gets processed to aluminum, part of that goes back to Africa. And the first processing step from bauxite to aluminum is completely power driven, completely electricity driven. Wanjira spoke about the untapped renewable energy potential that Africa has. 60% of the world's best solar resources, 120 times the current global energy consumption, 50 times the expected electricity consumption of the world by 2040 is untapped renewable energy potential in Africa. Yet 98% of the bauxite that gets mined leaves the continent as a whole. Makes no sense. Makes absolutely zero climate development and economic sense. And every effort to try and solve energy poverty, which is also massive, 600 million Africans without access to energy, every effort to solve that doesn't take into account industry will have to be on the IV of philanthropy and public resources that are non-existent. Because the uncomfortable truth is that the real human need for power that is represented by those 600 disconnected Africans is a real need. It's not a bankable demand. It's not a viable, investable demand, because those people can't pay the fully loaded cost of getting the power to them. Frankly, rural populations the world over, surprise, surprise, are subsidized in their power cost, because grids are considered public goods and are funded out of public resources. The exact thing that most African countries with real constrained fiscal spaces don't have. So you want to solve energy access problems, and you want to invest in renewable energy, don't clap with one hand. Get the anchor industrial demand. Get the investable business cases that will help you strengthen the utilities, that will help you grow and diversify your economies, that will help you increase your fiscal space. Not automatically, by the way. So I'm not saying that if all we did was smelting Africa's bauxite to aluminum, everything would be fantastic, because there's been a very, very long history of very exploitative approaches to both extracting Africa's resources and the minimum processing that already happens. But in the absence of those kind of interventions, we're not going to unlock that virtuous cycle. The really uncomfortable bit of that, though, is that there's no one single lever to result in this. And people very often ask me that. So what's the one thing that needs to happen? What are the two things that need to happen? Because we like that, right? We like sort of, okay, if we only pull this particular lever and everything will fall into place. And I've already touched on quite a few different things just now. I've touched on very constrained fiscal space, which requires changes to how we deal with debt and how we deal with the international financial architecture. It requires a bridge-down agenda, it requires reforms at the World Bank. I've touched on export opportunities. That means that you need to think about how do we structure trade and industry policy, not just in Africa, but globally, in a way that creates a proper level playing field, and that creates the right financial incentives for green first African products to actually be able to compete on global markets. So there's lots of macroeconomic pieces that need to fall into place, from trade policy, from reform of the financial system. But let's not lose sight of what Wanjiru opened with. Frankly, climate positive growth is Africa's only opportunity to get to middle income status this century. Its only opportunity. And if you don't care about that, first of all, shame on you. But if you don't care about that, there is no way that the world will achieve net zero by 2050 if Africa's opportunity to decarbonize industrial production and to remove carbon and to protect its remaining natural carbon sinks is left by the wayside. And that is existential to all life on Earth. And that goes to that mindset shift that we spoke about. And it was so great. I don't know how many of you last year followed the Africa Climate Summit and the Nairobi Declaration that came out of that. But that African agency that was embodied in the Nairobi Declaration, where the African leaders said, this is how we see the future of our continent. And this is, yes, what we ask of the rest of the world, but this is what we commit to doing. Because we take a stance here, we want to lead this way. That genuinely still makes me somewhat emotional to talk about. But it requires that same mindset shift in these hallways and in the parts of the world that I come from. Because as long as those parts keep seeing Africa as a mere victim and not as part of the solution, then we won't have those conversations about market access, trade policy, finance reform. And not only will extreme poverty continue to exist in Africa, but mankind will disappear as we know it because net zero is out of the window. What fairy tale is that?
I don't know. This is Sleeping Beauty, right? Except when she, so she was sleeping for 100 years and then she wakes up and it's not a kiss, it's a slap in the face. About the fact that the world has changed. Now, I see Stella here from Jacob's Ladder, and I think Philip had some provocations around skills and around education. And Jacob's Ladder is doing some really interesting work, so I'd love for you to speak a little bit to that.
Does it someone can learn
The Ubuntu effect is happening in the microphones. That's great.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Stella Bogonko, co-founder and CEO of Jacob's Ladder Africa. We focus on green workforce development on the continent, in this case, Africa. I had something prepared, but then as I listened to Wanjiru Waweru and the different people that have spoken, I just thought to probably move away from the numbers and give two examples that hopefully will drive the point home. So as part of our workforce development work, we work with young people who have brilliant ideas and help them to develop those ideas to pre-seed funding stage. And one of the young people, young women actually, in the cohorts that we are currently running, that's handling a renewable, that's focused on renewable energy, is a 19-year-old girl who decided to take hyacinth, which is a weed that grows in Lake Victoria in Kenya, take the hyacinth and use it to produce briquettes, and work with women in the community to be able to, address the issue of clean cooking. And it's not so much the solution, it's the mentality that she has that she can actually change and actually solve for clean cooking, having seen the numbers from the World Bank and the WRI, the 900 million people on the continent that lack access to clean cooking. within her, she actually believes she can do it, and we're supporting her to be able to arrive at that point. And yet, the honest truth is, she's facing the same challenges when it comes to fundraising that she went through. You know, the convincing, the telling the story, the trying to change the narrative, the trying to say, this is an actual problem on this part of the world, and I believe that I can be able to change it. The second story that I'd like to tell is a young man who some of us know and has become a rising star in Kenya, who developed an AI tool that detects logging and wildfires. And that is a problem, or a solution rather, that can be used in Kenya when it comes to logging, or in Greece when it comes to wildfires. And recently, a couple of people have been coming up to him and offering him to buy out the solution. It's an AI, it's a very interesting solution. But the challenge is he can tell that he's getting the short end of the stick. If he was from this part of the world, he'd be getting millions, if not billions, for that solution. And yet he has to contend with the same problems that Shiro went through when it comes to raising funds. The question I have, and I was hoping to hear, first of all, from Shiro in terms of her process of fundraising, but also just to leave with us in the room is, when will that story change? When will this generation of younger entrepreneurs that are coming up, and in their minds they're not coming from a world where they don't know what the other part of the world looks like, they actually have seen it on the internet, they've been exposed to it differently, they've grown up differently. They believe they can solve for climate change, and they do need to solve for it, and they've been told by the Wanjira and the likes that you have the means to solve for it, and Africa is the solution. But when they try to bring the solutions to the table, they are faced with hurdles that they're not able to overcome. When will this story change, and how do we change it? My hope and prayer is that beyond the convenings that we have, we'll actually move to action, so that that part of the world, like Philip was saying, that is actually the solution in terms of renewable energy, critical minerals, arable land. We have all the potential, but we lack the enabling environment, especially when it comes to financial resources, to be able to activate those solutions in terms of enabling the innovations that are coming out of the continent. But what will we do about that? Thank you.
So sure, I know there's a question directed at you. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. I think Marianne probably can speak to some of that ecosystem building around the dignity of the African enterprise as a strategic investment. Endeavor is doing some really interesting work, and I think it would be really helpful to hear your voice on that. The thing I want you to say, as Marianne speaks into that, is because she mentioned she's a creative serial entrepreneur. She's also a storyteller, and she told me a story about Eliud Kipchoge and the inspiration of watching the Ineos run. That first of all completely changed my understanding of what running means, and then second of all, just I think captures perfectly the point that Stella made, and then maybe we could try and figure out a way of stitching some of this together, maybe take one more intervention, and then wash it all down with a drink. So, Marianne.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So Marianne Onchola, I'm the Managing Director for Endeavor in Kenya. We are a global network of high-growth founders, and what compels me to be part of this conversation is to also say that Africa is not just about small businesses, We also have a scale-up ultimate investment story, which is where businesses start from all the microfinance work that has gone, in. But we also see them all the way through. We don't just let them once they start looking like they're successful, and then, we go back. And so we have all these many small businesses, but we actually don't see them through. So it's the belief that we need high-growth firms on the continent, and that we don't wear out and ban out Shiro and Philip while they're trying to build all the infrastructure. They actually don't get to that ultimate scale-up story. So my call to action today is to also build an ecosystem that sees the investment story all the way to scale and to exit, because we are not just creating jobs, but we also need to create wealth on the continent. And the statistics that pain me, when I have this grand vision, is that In 2023, African firms raised $3.4 billion in venture capital. So this is risk capital that wants to back big ideas. Globally, that was $340 billion raised in venture capital, 1%. The world was just willing to risk 1% of venture capital, pools of funds, to scale up entrepreneurs on the continent. That tells me you don't believe that Africa is a scale-up continent. And the challenge that I want to pose to all of us today is to see our entrepreneurs all the way through. They're not just a feel-good story, they are a scale-up story.
So let me just give you a bit of what's in my head on a daily basis. First, I don't sleep at all. Like I said, we don't have a luxury of time. But to speak on being the serial part of being a creative entrepreneur is, and to lead to the GOAT, and Kipchoge's run, is on any given day, I'm trying to be a material scientist. Because yes, we manufacture furniture for children, but again, we don't want to be cutting the trees, so what's the alternative? So I have to think about what has lignin, whatever it is that can do this. That's one part of my brain. And the other part is like, okay, so we build the furniture, but they need the beds, and they need the bedding, so I start understanding cotton growing, so you start seeing me on a cotton farm. So many things going on at the same time. And I'm like, why must I be the one trying to do all these things? And then my auditor keeps calling. It's like, we need to discuss the books. I'm like, oh, I need to go pick my children from school. Because also we are moms. On any given day, we're also trying to create policies that actually make sense. It's exhausting being an entrepreneur, trying to do all this by yourself, by and large. Because we keep saying, join us. I'll challenge you. Please come for an internship for a month with us. Just 1 month. Maybe too long. No, they need to be exhausted. So entrepreneurship on the continent is a marathon. It's not a sprint. How many of you know the Kenyan runners here? Okay, we're not all runners, Wanjiru and I don't run. But we are runners. So, and we run phenomenally. Everybody from Nike has tried to understand, and I remember the Nike Museum even had a sneaker model on how we grip the ground. I'm like, really? It's not how we grip the ground, it's genetics, okay? So everybody's just trying to find this thing so they can then do it as well. You cannot run like us. Please stop attending those marathons. But moral of the story was when the GOAT Eliud was trying to do sub-2, there was an organization called INEOS. That's the money bags. Now, he has a talent in it himself. It is phenomenal. He couldn't do it alone. They then picked other athletes like him, top of their game. Not those who run in primary school, not those who run in the gym, those who really run globally and understand what it means to train. And they all came together, and I believe there are almost like 30 of them, knowing very well that the training they're doing is for Eliud to try and achieve sub-2. So they train with him knowing the win is for him. They then chose a country that has particular wind, less wind, they had scientists and all. And if you watch that race, when they start off, Eliud is even in the middle. And the reason why, right? Then there are those who start off with him, all of them running, but everybody knows where they're running up until. Remember, each of them is the best at their game, but there are those who will go further in this marathon. It was a very emotional run for me in even just trying to achieve that, but it reminded me that what entrepreneurs in Kenya, in Africa need is the pace setters he had. Each best be top of their game, whether it's the finance, whether it's the government teams, everybody, because the win here was Eliud, but for me the win here is Africa. Knowing very well, you have to. It's not that, oh, I used to run. It's I still run and I'm good. And you find each other. The win here will be for Africa. Why must I start understanding material science as well? why can't the material scientists come and say, okay, this is what you're trying to solve for? The finance people, don't give me a template used in, I don't know where in the world. Let's co-create. Because if Africa does not win, good people, the world will not win. Fact. This is not a fairy tale. This is a real story. And like the clock, it is ticking. It is ticking. And I mean this. We get exhausted speaking on panels. I'm like, what more do you want us to do and say? Is it the English we don't know? Then get us the translator. Let me say that I'm translator. Get us a translator. Get us whatever we need, because we must win this race. We call it Juakali in Kenya, meaning we work under the sun. Fact. So why aren't we using that in our industries? Why is it good enough to say it's so hot and use sunscreen? Shame on you. Come and work with us outside and bright enough, maybe you'll understand. Walk barefoot with us and maybe you'll understand what it takes before you start saying, well, investor ready. Yeah, it is impossible if I've almost fallen in the toilet, which is a bit latrine, that you guys, your toilets heat up, then you're coming to tell me in your hotel, no, come, 2 months, internship, should be pre-qualification for you entering our countries. And then maybe we'll give you some food. Maybe. But maybe you'll start understanding what it takes to be an African entrepreneur and what it takes to train for this marathon. That is a long game. 42 kilometers is not easy. Africa is not easy, but she is unbelievably beautiful. If only you took time to understand her and love her like I do. Parting shot, love is an action. You cannot be here talking about the climate and concerned. That is not love. That is just because it's a buzzword. I've had so many buzzwords this week, I'm tired. So tired. No, the newest is the what? Architecture? Economy, what? I don't even understand what they say. But it doesn't translate to action. And action is love. The sun will never, ever forget to shine on a village because of its size. You may ignore us right now, but one day, you will be able to. So guys and ladies, this is not just a speaking engagement. This is what an entrepreneur from Africa looks like. A woman entrepreneur who is relentless. My tombstone will say she tried. It will say she tried. So it's either you're with us, or literally you're against us. There are no gray areas here. And every day is a day gone. And the clock is ticking, not just for us, but for the world, truly. So, please, invest in us. If you don't speak the right English, get us a translator. But I don't think we're that bad. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, and that is how Little Red Riding Hood beat back at it. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, your engagement. This was a bit of an experiment, I think, for all of us. You made it a success, so thank you. And I think I will hand it back to the overall conveners, if only to say, ask yourselves what you can do to be part of this story, wherever it is you're at. You're already part of it. How do you shift outcomes? Because your ability to shift is so much more exponentially impactful when you're telling that story as well from where you're sitting. From where we're sitting, this is real and we see it. If from where you're sitting, you affirm that reality and align, really nothing is beyond us in terms of achieving this ultimate story. So thank you so much for your time. Godspeed. And Wanjira, here we go.
Not a word to add. You cannot improve on perfection on way. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here.